Some people think they know everything about strength until they meet someone who doesn't need to prove it. In a military cafeteria where egos clash like thunderstorms, one woman was about to teach everyone present that the quietest person in the room might just be the most dangerous. What happened next would become legendary among the ranks, a story whispered in barracks and shared in training camps across the country. This isn't just about military rivalry. It's about the moment when assumptions crumble and respect is earned in the most unexpected way. Staff Sergeant Maria Vasquez had learned long ago that blending in was often the smartest strategy. As she walked through the entrance of Camp Pendleton's main dining facility, her boots barely made a sound against the polished floor. The massive cafeteria buzzed with the familiar chaos of military life. Hundreds of Marines, sailors, and other service members grabbing quick meals between training exercises, their conversations mixing into a steady hum of voices, punctuated by the clatter of trays and silverware. Maria moved through the lunch line with practiced efficiency, her movements economical and purposeful. She wore standard camouflage utilities, nothing that would distinguish her from any other service member. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her face carried the kind of calm composure that came from years of training and real-world experience. To most observers, she looked like just another Marine grabbing a quick bite. But Maria wasn't just another Marine. She was a Navy SEAL, one of only a handful of women to own the coveted Trident pin. Her transfer to Camp Pendleton was temporary, a brief assignment to provide specialized training to Marine units preparing for deployment. The base command had decided to keep her arrival low-key, wanting to avoid the media attention that often followed when female SEALs were stationed at traditional Marine bases. As Maria balanced her tray and scanned the crowded dining hall for an empty table, she could feel the occasional curious glance. Word had spread through informal channels that a female SEAL was on base, though most people didn't know exactly who she was. The speculation had been building for days, with various theories floating around about which woman might be the mysterious operator. She spotted an empty table near the back of the dining hall and made her way toward it, weaving between chairs and conversations. The table was positioned perfectly, far enough from the main traffic flow to eat in relative peace, but close enough to several other tables that she wouldn't appear antisocial. Maria had developed a sixth sense about these things during her years in special operations, where situational awareness could mean the difference between life and death. Just as she set down her tray, a burst of loud laughter erupted from a nearby table occupied by a group of Marines. Maria glanced over briefly, taking in the scene without appearing to stare. 5 Marines sat around the table, all wearing the standard woodland camouflage utilities. 4 of them were laughing at something one of their companions had said, while the 5th, a large man with sergeant stripes, held court with obvious enjoyment. The sergeant was impossible to miss. Standing well over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders that strained against his uniform, he had the kind of presence that naturally drew attention. His name tape read Thompson, and everything about his posture suggested someone accustomed to being the biggest person in the room. His voice carried easily across the dining hall, confident and booming with the kind of authority that came from years of knowing he could back up whatever he said with physical force. "I'm telling you guys," Thompson was saying, his voice loud enough that nearby tables couldn't help but overhear. "This whole female SEAL thing is just political correctness gone crazy. They're lowering the standards just to make some politicians happy back in Washington." Maria continued eating her sandwich, keeping her expression neutral even as Thompson's words reached her ears. She had heard variations of this conversation countless times over the years, in training facilities, on deployment, in briefing rooms where she was often the only woman present. The doubts and skepticism weren't new, and neither was the assumption that her achievements were somehow less legitimate than those of her male counterparts. "Think about it," Thompson continued, warming to his theme as his audience nodded along. "The physical standards for SEAL training are there for a reason. You can't just change them because you want to be inclusive. When bullets start flying, politics don't matter, only whether you can carry your teammate to safety or complete the mission." One of the other Marines at the table, a corporal with sandy hair, leaned forward with interest. "Have you seen her yet? The SEAL who's supposed to be here?" Thompson shook his head dismissively. "Nah, but I guarantee you she's not what they're making her out to be. Probably some admin type who got fast-tracked through a modified program. They'll parade her around for photo ops, but when it comes to real operational work, she'll be behind a desk where she belongs." Maria took a sip of her water, her movements calm and controlled despite the growing irritation she felt building in her chest. She had spent years proving herself in environments far more challenging than this dining hall, had earned her place through the same grueling training that had broken countless men. Her operational record included deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq, successful hostage rescue operations, and counter-terrorism missions that remained classified. But Thompson wasn't finished. His voice grew louder as he gained confidence from his audience's attention. I mean, seriously, how is someone who probably weighs 120 pounds going to drag a 200-pound Marine out of a kill zone? How is she going to carry the same combat load as a male SEAL? It's basic physics, not sexism. The conversation was beginning to attract attention from nearby tables. Several Marines had turned to listen, some nodding in agreement while others looked uncomfortable with the increasingly heated rhetoric. Maria could sense the shift in the dining hall's atmosphere as more people tuned in to Thompson's monologue. And don't get me started on unit cohesion, Thompson continued, his gestures becoming more animated. You put a woman in an all-male unit, and suddenly everyone's thinking about something other than the mission. It's human nature. Guys are going to compete for her attention. They're going to treat her differently, and when things get intense, that could get people killed. Maria finished her sandwich and began working on her side of vegetables, maintaining the same unhurried pace despite the increasingly inflammatory comments from Thompson's table. She had faced enemy fire with less emotional reaction than she was feeling now, but years of military discipline kept her expression neutral. A staff sergeant from another table finally spoke up, his voice carrying a note of caution. Come on, Thompson, maybe dial it back a little. You don't know anything about this woman's qualifications. Thompson turned toward the voice with a dismissive wave of his hand. Look, Martinez, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm just being realistic. The SEAL teams are the most elite fighting force in the world. They've maintained that standard for decades by being absolutely ruthless about who they let in. The moment you start making exceptions, for any reason, you compromise that excellence. But what if she really did meet the same standards? Asked the corporal with sandy hair. What if she actually made it through the same training as everyone else? Thompson's laugh was sharp and derisive. Then I'll eat my cover. But I guarantee you, when push comes to shove, when the real testing starts, she won't measure up. And that's not her fault. It's just biology. Men and women are different, and there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that fact. The dining hall had grown noticeably quieter as more people became aware of the heated discussion. Maria could feel dozens of eyes glancing between Thompson's table and the rest of the room, as if everyone was waiting for something to happen. The tension was building like electricity before a storm. Maria stood up slowly, picking up her empty tray with the same calm efficiency she had displayed throughout her meal. Several people watched as she moved toward the tray return area, her stride confident but unhurried. She deposited her dishes and utensils in the appropriate bins, then turned back toward the dining area. Instead of heading for the exit as most observers expected, Maria walked directly towards Thompson's table. Her approach was neither aggressive nor hesitant, simply purposeful. Conversations at nearby tables gradually died away as people realized what was happening. Thompson noticed her approach when she was still several steps away. His eyes traveled up from her boots to her face, taking in her slight frame and calm expression. A slow smile spread across his features as he apparently concluded that this must be the female SEAL everyone had been talking about. Well, well, Thompson said, his voice carrying easily across the now quiet section of the dining hall. Looks like we've got company, boys. He turned more fully toward Maria as she stopped near their table. You must be the famous Navy SEAL I've been hearing so much about. Maria's response was quiet but clear enough for nearby tables to hear. I couldn't help but overhear your conversation, Sergeant Thompson. You seem to have some strong opinions about female SEALs. Thompson's grin widened. Just calling it like I see it. Nothing personal. I'm sure you're a nice lady. But facts are facts, and the fact is that women don't belong in special operations. It's not about being mean or sexist. It's about maintaining standards and keeping our warriors alive. I see, Maria said, her tone remaining perfectly level. And these opinions are based on your personal experience with female special operations personnel? Don't need personal experience to understand basic biology, Thompson replied, his confidence clearly growing as his audience expanded. Look, I've got nothing against women in the military. My sister's a Marine, actually. She's a great supply officer. But there's a difference between supporting the mission from the rear and being on the sharp end of the spear. Several of Thompson's table mates were looking increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, but Thompson himself seemed to be enjoying the attention. He gestured toward Maria with an exaggerated politeness that barely concealed his condescension. I'm curious, though, Thompson continued, what's your actual operational experience? How many combat deployments have you completed? Any real-world missions? Or has your career been mostly training in public relations? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Maria could sense the entire section of the dining hall holding its breath, waiting to see how she would respond to Thompson's increasingly aggressive interrogation. She took a moment to consider her words, knowing that whatever happened next would likely be discussed throughout the base within hours. 6 deployments, Maria said simply. 3 to Afghanistan, 2 to Iraq, 1 classified location. 12 direct action raids, 4 hostage rescue operations, 15 reconnaissance missions. 2 Bronze Stars, 1 Silver Star, and a Purple Heart from an IED blast outside Kandahar. The casual way she delivered this information made it somehow more impressive than if she had shouted it. Thompson's smile faltered slightly as he processed what he had just heard, but his ego wouldn't let him back down in front of his audience. "That's an impressive resume," Thompson said, his tone suggesting he didn't entirely believe what he had heard. That paper accomplishments are one thing, real capability is another. "I've seen plenty of people with decorations who couldn't cut it when things got serious." Maria nodded thoughtfully. "You're absolutely right that there's a difference between credentials and capability. Perhaps you'd like to test that theory?" The simple question sent a ripple of anticipation through the nearby tables. Thompson leaned back in his chair, clearly intrigued by whatever Maria might be proposing. "What did you have in mind?" Thompson asked, his voice carrying a note of excitement at the prospect of proving his point in a more direct fashion. Maria's suggestion was delivered in the same calm, matter-of-fact tone she had used throughout the conversation, but her words would set in motion a confrontation that no one in that dining hall would ever forget. "How about an arm wrestling match?" Maria suggested, her voice carrying just enough challenge to make it clear she was serious. "Right here, right now. If you win, I'll publicly acknowledge that you were right about female SEALs. If I win, you apologize to every woman in uniform for your comments today." The dining hall fell into complete silence. Even conversations at distant tables stopped as word spread quickly through the crowd about what was happening. Thompson stared at Maria for a long moment, clearly trying to process the unexpected turn of events. "You want to arm wrestle?" Thompson repeated, his disbelief evident. "Lady, I don't know what kind of games you played in SEAL training, but I outweigh you by at least 80 pounds. This isn't going to prove anything, except that size matters." "Then you shouldn't have any problem accepting," Maria replied smoothly. "Unless you're worried that your theories about female capabilities might not hold up under testing." The challenge was delivered so calmly that it took Thompson a moment to realize he was being backed into a corner. His tablemates were watching him with expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed amusement. The growing crowd of spectators made backing down increasingly difficult without losing face. "Look, I don't want to hurt you," Thompson said, trying to find a graceful way out of the situation. "Arm wrestling isn't exactly a fair contest between a man and woman. How about we settle this some other way?" "Such as?" Maria asked, raising an eyebrow. Thompson looked around desperately, searching for an alternative that wouldn't make him look like he was afraid to compete against a woman half his size. "I don't know. Maybe a fitness test? Pull-ups, push-ups, something like that?" "I'm comfortable with arm wrestling," Maria said firmly. "Unless you'd prefer to simply apologize now and save us both the trouble." The implicit suggestion that Thompson was afraid sent a visible flash of anger across his face. His jaw tightened as he looked around at the dozens of Marines now gathered around their table, many of them holding their phones to record whatever happened next. "Fine," Thompson said, his voice hard with determination. "But when this is over, I don't want to hear any complaints about how unfair it was. You asked for this." One of Thompson's tablemates quickly cleared a space on the table, while another produced a napkin to serve as a starting grip marker. Word continued to spread throughout the dining hall, and soon nearly every person in the facility had either moved closer to watch or turned in their seats to get a better view. Thompson rolled up his right sleeve, revealing a heavily muscled forearm covered with tattoos depicting various Marine insignia and unit patches. His hand was massive, with thick fingers and prominent veins that spoke to years of heavy lifting and physical labor. He flexed experimentally, the muscles in his arm bunching visibly under his skin. Maria rolled up her own sleeve with equal calm, revealing an arm that was lean and well-defined, but obviously much smaller than Thompson's. Her forearm showed the kind of functional muscle that came from climbing, combat training, and carrying heavy equipment over long distances. There were no tattoos, just a small scar near her wrist that could have come from any number of training accidents or operational injuries. "Last chance to back out," Thompson said as they positioned themselves across from each other. "I really don't want to embarrass you in front of all these people." "I appreciate your concern," Maria replied, settling into position with practiced ease. "But I think I can handle whatever happens." They gripped hands across the table, and the difference in size was immediately obvious to everyone watching. Thompson's hand completely engulfed Maria's, his fingers thick and powerful against her more slender grip. Several people in the crowd exchanged glances, clearly thinking the contest was over before it began. The corporal who had been sitting at Thompson's table was nominated to serve as referee. He looked distinctly uncomfortable with the role, but stepped forward anyway. "Okay, when I say go, you start. No jerking or sudden movements at the beginning. Ready?" Both competitors nodded, their eyes locked across the table. Thompson wore an expression of confident determination, clearly expecting to end the contest quickly and decisively. Maria's face remained calm and focused, showing no sign of nervousness or doubt about what she was attempting. "Go." Thompson immediately applied pressure, his massive arm flexing as he tried to overwhelm Maria's resistance through pure strength. For a moment, it seemed like his strategy would work. Their joined hands wavered in the middle of the table as Thompson's superior size and weight began to tell. But something unexpected happened. Instead of Maria's arm being forced down, their hands remained locked in the center position. Thompson's face showed increasing strain as he realized that his initial burst of power hadn't achieved the quick victory he expected. The crowd watched in fascination as the contest settled into a battle of endurance rather than explosive strength. Thompson's face began to redden with effort, the veins in his neck standing out as he applied maximum pressure. His breathing became labored as he discovered that overpowering Maria wasn't going to be as easy as he had anticipated. Maria, meanwhile, maintained the same calm expression she had worn throughout their entire confrontation. Her breathing remained steady and controlled, her posture relaxed, despite the obvious strain on her arm. She wasn't trying to force Thompson's arm down. She was simply holding position, letting him exhaust himself against her resistance. "What the hell?" Thompson muttered through gritted teeth, unable to understand why a woman a third of his size was matching his strength. He shifted his position, trying to find a better angle or leverage that would allow him to break through Maria's defense. The dining hall was completely silent, except for the sound of Thompson's increasingly labored breathing. Even the kitchen staff had stopped their work to watch the unprecedented contest taking place in their dining room. Cell phones continued to record from multiple angles, capturing every moment of what was clearly becoming something far more significant than a simple arm wrestling match. Minutes passed with neither competitor gaining a clear advantage. Thompson's confidence had evaporated, replaced by frustration and growing desperation. His entire body was now involved in the contest, his left hand gripping the edge of the table for additional leverage, his feet braced against the floor as he tried to bring his full weight to bear. Maria remained in exactly the same position she had started in, her left hand resting casually in her lap, her body relaxed despite the tremendous pressure being applied to her right arm. The contrast between their approaches was becoming more obvious with each passing second. "This is impossible," Thompson gasped, sweat now beading on his forehead despite the air-conditioned environment. "How are you doing this?" "Technique," Maria replied simply, her voice betraying no strain whatsoever. "And patience." Thompson redoubled his efforts, his face contorting with the strain of trying to overcome what should have been a significant physical mismatch. But, instead of gaining ground, he began to lose it. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, their joined hands began to move in Maria's favor. The crowd noticed the shift immediately. Excited whispers rippled through the assembled Marines as they realized the contest was turning in an unexpected direction. Thompson's eyes widened in disbelief as he felt his arm being forced backward despite his best efforts to resist. "No way," someone in the crowd whispered. "She's actually winning." Thompson's breathing was now ragged and desperate. His entire body shook with effort as he fought against the steady, inexorable pressure Maria was applying. But it was clear to everyone watching that his strength was failing while hers seemed unlimited. "Impossible," Thompson repeated, his voice strained and high with panic. "This can't be happening." But it was happening. Inch by inch, Maria continued to force Thompson's arm toward the table. Her expression never changed from the calm, focused concentration she had maintained throughout the contest. She wasn't gloating or showing any sign of satisfaction. She was simply completing a task with the same professional competence she brought to everything else. The crowd pressed closer, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Many of the Marines present had arm wrestled with Thompson before, and knew firsthand how incredibly strong he was. Seeing him not just losing, but being dominated by someone a fraction of his size, challenged everything they thought they knew about physical confrontation. Thompson made one final desperate attempt to reverse the contest's momentum. He threw every ounce of his remaining strength into a last surge of resistance, his face turning red with the effort. For a brief moment, their hands stopped moving as Thompson's final gambit met Maria's steady pressure. Then, with a soft thud that seemed to echo through the silent dining hall, the back of Thompson's hand hit the table. The contest was over. For several seconds, nobody moved or spoke. Thompson stared down at his defeated hand as if he couldn't quite believe what had happened. Maria released her grip and calmly rolled down her sleeve, showing no sign that she had just engaged in an intense physical competition. "Good match," Maria said quietly, extending her left hand for a traditional handshake. Thompson looked up at her with an expression of complete bewilderment. His worldview had just been fundamentally challenged in the most direct way possible, and he was struggling to process the implications of what had occurred. "How?" Thompson asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did you do that?" "Training," Maria replied simply. "The same training that every SEAL receives, regardless of gender. Technique, mental discipline, and understanding how to use your opponent's strength against them." The crowd began to stir as the reality of what they had witnessed sank in. Phones continued to record as excited conversations broke out among the spectators. Many of the Marines present had never seen anything like what had just occurred, and they were eager to share their thoughts and theories about how it had been possible. Thompson finally took Maria's offered handshake, his grip noticeably weaker than it had been at the beginning of their contest. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice subdued and thoughtful. "Actually, I owe everyone an apology. That was the agreement," Maria acknowledged. "But I think what matters more is understanding why you were wrong. It wasn't just about arm wrestling. It was about the assumptions you made without any evidence to support them." Thompson nodded slowly, clearly still processing the implications of his defeat. Around them, the crowd was beginning to disperse, though many Marines continued to watch and listen to their conversation. "I thought I knew what strength looked like," Thompson admitted. "I assumed that bigger automatically meant stronger, that physical dominance was just about size and weight. Physical capability is about much more than raw strength," Maria explained patiently. "Endurance, technique, mental discipline, and understanding how to apply force efficiently are all factors. SEAL training teaches you to maximize all of those elements, not just one." Thompson's table mates had remained silent throughout the contest and its aftermath, clearly uncertain about how to react to their friend's unexpected humiliation. The dynamics of their group had shifted dramatically in the space of just a few minutes. "So everything I said about female SEALs," Thompson began, trailing off as he realized the full scope of his error, "was based on assumptions rather than facts," Maria finished gently. "I understand why those assumptions seemed logical to you, but that's exactly why actual testing matters more than theoretical discussions." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of a tall man wearing officer's insignia. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison was the base's executive officer, and his presence immediately commanded attention from everyone in the vicinity. "Is everything all right here?" Morrison asked, his tone neutral but his eyes taking in the scene with obvious interest. "Just a friendly competition, sir," Maria replied, coming to attention along with every other enlisted person in the area. Morrison's gaze moved between Maria and Thompson, clearly aware that something significant had just occurred. "I see. And how did this friendly competition turn out?" "The sergeant here learned something important about making assumptions," Maria said diplomatically. "I think we all did." Morrison nodded thoughtfully. "Excellent. Sergeant Thompson, I trust there won't be any further need for such demonstrations?" "No, sir," Thompson replied quickly. "Definitely not, sir. Outstanding. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, a word with you in private, please." As Morrison led Maria away from the crowd, Thompson was left to face the aftermath of what had just occurred. His table mates were looking at him with a mixture of sympathy and amusement, while other Marines continued to discuss the unprecedented contest they had just witnessed. The story would spread throughout the base within hours, growing in dramatic detail with each retelling. But the core facts would remain consistent. A female Navy SEAL had just dominated one of the strongest Marines on base in a direct test of physical capability, challenging every assumption about gender and military effectiveness in the process. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison led Maria through the dining hall toward a quieter corner where they could speak privately. As they walked, Maria could feel dozens of eyes following their movement, the aftermath of the arm wrestling contest still rippling through conversations throughout the facility. "That was quite a demonstration," Morrison said once they were out of earshot from the crowd. "I take it you're Staff Sergeant Vasquez, the SEAL instructor we've been expecting?"
"Yes, sir," Maria confirmed.
"I apologize if my actions were inappropriate." The situation escalated beyond what I initially intended. Morrison studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful rather than disapproving. Actually, I'm not sure you could have handled that situation any better. Sergeant Thompson has been expressing his opinions about female service members quite loudly since you arrived on base. Perhaps a direct demonstration was exactly what he needed. Maria nodded but remained silent, waiting to see if Morrison had additional concerns about her conduct. The question now, Morrison continued, is how we handle the aftermath. By tomorrow morning, every person on this base will know what happened here today. Video footage is probably already being shared on social media. This could become a significant public relations situation. I understand, sir, Maria said. If you need to take any administrative action regarding my conduct, I accept full responsibility for my decisions. Morrison waved off her concern with a slight smile. Actually, Staff Sergeant, I think this incident might work in our favor. We've been struggling with how to introduce your training program without creating controversy. Perhaps having Marines witness your capabilities firsthand will make the transition smoother than we anticipated. Over the following days, the story of the dining hall confrontation spread far beyond Camp Pendleton. Video clips circulated on military forums and social media platforms, generating intense discussion about gender integration in special operations units. Some commenters praised Maria's calm professionalism under pressure, while others questioned whether the contest had been somehow staged for publicity purposes. Thompson's reaction to his defeat proved more complex than anyone had anticipated. Rather than harboring resentment or embarrassment, he seemed genuinely curious about understanding how Maria had been able to overcome his size advantage. 2 days after their confrontation, he approached her after one of her training sessions. Staff Sergeant, Thompson said, his tone respectful and uncertain. I was wondering if I could ask you something. Of course, Sergeant, Maria replied, setting down the equipment she had been organizing. That technique you used during our arm wrestling match. I've been thinking about it, and I can't figure out how it worked. I mean, I know I'm stronger than you in terms of raw muscle power, but somehow that didn't matter. Could you explain what you did? Maria considered his question carefully. Thompson's inquiry seemed genuine rather than confrontational, suggesting that their encounter had genuinely shifted his perspective rather than simply embarrassing him. It's called biomechanical advantage, Maria explained. Most people think arm wrestling is about overpowering your opponent. But it's actually about efficiency of movement and understanding leverage points. When you tried to force my arm down quickly, you were working against your own natural positioning. Thompson listened intently as Maria continued her explanation. I used your initial aggression against you by maintaining a defensive position that forced you to overextend. Once you committed to that angle of attack, I could shift my leverage to take advantage of your compromised position. The harder you pushed in the wrong direction, the more vulnerable you became to a counterattack. So, it wasn't really about strength at all, Thompson said slowly. Strength was a factor, Maria corrected, but technique, patience, and understanding your opponent's mindset were more important. You expected to win quickly through superior force, which made your approach predictable. I just had to wait for the right moment to exploit that predictability. Thompson nodded thoughtfully. Is that the kind of thing they teach in SEAL training? Physical confrontation is only one small part of what we learn, Maria explained. But the underlying principles, patience, observation, using your opponent's expectations against them, those apply to almost every aspect of special operations work. Would you be willing to teach me? Thompson asked. I mean, if you have time in your schedule. I'd like to understand more about these techniques. Maria was surprised by the request, but found herself impressed by Thompson's willingness to learn from someone he had initially dismissed. I think that could be arranged. My training schedule includes hand-to-hand combat instruction for Marine units. You're welcome to participate if your chain of command approves. Word of Thompson's interest in Maria's training methods spread quickly through his unit, and soon several other Marines were requesting permission to attend her sessions. What had begun as a confrontation in the dining hall was evolving into an unexpected opportunity for cross-service learning. Maria's official training program launched the following week with more interest and enthusiasm than anyone had anticipated. The dining hall incident had served as an effective demonstration of her credentials, eliminating much of the skepticism that might otherwise have greeted a female instructor teaching combat techniques to male Marines. The first session took place in the base gymnasium, with nearly 40 Marines in attendance. Maria had designed the curriculum to focus on practical techniques that would complement the Marines' existing training rather than replace it. The goal here isn't to turn you into SEALs, Maria explained to the assembled group. You're already highly trained Marines with your own specialized skill sets. What I want to do is share some techniques and approaches that might enhance your existing capabilities. She began with basic biomechanical principles, demonstrating how understanding body mechanics could allow a smaller person to effectively control a larger opponent. Thompson volunteered to serve as her demonstration partner, showing remarkable good humor about being used to illustrate various defensive techniques. The key concept, Maria explained as she demonstrated a joint manipulation technique, is that you're not fighting your opponent's strength directly. You're redirecting it in a direction where they can't effectively resist. The Marines watched with obvious interest as Maria showed how minor adjustments in positioning and grip could completely neutralize size advantages. Many of them had never considered that physical confrontation could be approached as a technical skill rather than a simple test of strength and aggression. As the weeks progressed, Maria's training sessions became increasingly popular. Marines began requesting additional instruction time, and even officers started attending to observe her methods. The success of her program attracted attention from Marine Corps leadership, who began discussing ways to incorporate her techniques into broader training curricula. Thompson became one of Maria's most dedicated students, attending every session and practicing the techniques extensively during his free time. His transformation from skeptic to advocate was noticed by everyone in his unit, creating a ripple effect that influenced other Marines' attitudes toward the training program. I was completely wrong about everything, Thompson admitted to his table mates during one lunch conversation several weeks after the arm wrestling incident. I thought I understood what military capability looked like, but I was only seeing part of the picture. So you're saying women belong in special operations? Asked the sandy-haired corporal who had been present during the original confrontation. Thompson considered the question carefully before responding. I'm saying that capability isn't determined by what someone looks like or what assumptions we make about them. It's determined by their actual performance under real conditions. He gestured toward the gymnasium where Maria was conducting an afternoon training session. Staff Sergeant Vasquez has proven her capabilities through years of operational experience and by demonstrating her skills directly. That's what should matter, not whether she fits some preconceived notion of what a warrior looks like. The conversation represented a fundamental shift in perspective that was occurring throughout the base. Maria's presence in her training program had challenged long-held assumptions about gender roles in military service, creating opportunities for broader discussions about effectiveness and inclusion. The impact of these changes extended beyond Camp Pendleton. Military publications began featuring articles about cross-service training programs and the benefits of incorporating diverse perspectives into military education. The dining hall incident, initially seen as a potential public relations problem, had evolved into a case study for successful integration and professional development. 6 months after her arrival at Camp Pendleton, Maria received orders for a new assignment that would take her to a different base. The news generated significant disappointment among the Marines who had been participating in her training program, many of whom had developed considerable respect for her methods and expertise. Thompson requested permission to organize a farewell event for Maria, which took place in the same dining hall where their original confrontation had occurred. The irony of the location was not lost on anyone present, and Thompson made reference to it in his speech. 6 months ago, in this very room, I made some assumptions about Staff Sergeant Vasquez that were completely wrong, Thompson said, addressing a crowd that included most of the Marines who had attended her training sessions. I thought I knew what strength and capability looked like, but I learned that my understanding was limited and narrow. He paused, looking around the room at the assembled faces. Staff Sergeant Vasquez taught us more than just combat techniques. She taught us that excellence comes in many forms, and that our job as Marines is to recognize and respect that excellence wherever we find it. Maria stood to respond, her demeanor showing the same calm professionalism that had characterized her entire time at the base. I want to thank all of you for your openness to learning new approaches and techniques. You've proven that the Marine Corps' reputation for adaptability and excellence is well-deserved. She looked specifically at Thompson as she continued. Sergeant Thompson, your willingness to question your initial assumptions and embrace new ideas exemplifies the best qualities of military leadership. You've shown that true strength includes the courage to admit when you're wrong and the wisdom to learn from those experiences. The farewell event concluded with presentations of certificates of completion for the Marines who had participated in Maria's training program. Many of them expressed interest in continuing to develop the techniques they had learned, ensuring that her influence would continue long after her departure. As Maria prepared to leave Camp Pendleton, she reflected on the unexpected way her assignment had unfolded. What had begun with a confrontational challenge in a dining hall had evolved into a successful training program that changed perspectives and built bridges between different military communities. The story of her time at the base would continue to circulate long after her departure, serving as an example of how initial conflict could be transformed into mutual respect through demonstrated competence and professional integrity. For Thompson and the other Marines who had worked with her, the experience had provided valuable lessons about the danger of assumptions and the importance of judging people based on their actual capabilities rather than preconceived notions. Most importantly, Maria had proven that excellence in military service was not limited by gender or physical appearance, but was instead determined by skill, dedication, and the willingness to perform under pressure. Her quiet confidence and professional competence had spoken more loudly than any argument or policy directive could have, creating lasting change through the simple act of demonstrating what was possible. The dining hall where everything began returned to its normal routine of serving meals and hosting casual conversations. But the memory of that day remained, reminding everyone present that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected sources, and that true strength is often found in the places where we least expect to discover it.